In our last video, we were talking about how slavery was introduced into North America. And the colony it was introduced through was the Jamestown colony. And it makes sense because that was a business-based colony. And slavery and the growth of tobacco was a business. And we ended here talking about some of the horrific conditions. Well, if you need slaves, all of a sudden you have all this import, or I hate to say import, but the bringing in of all these slaves. Now how are we going to treat them once they're here, and what will be their legal status once they're here in the colony? And so under slavery, with all these slaves coming, slave codes or slave laws, how are we going to treat these people? What is their legal status now that we have so many here, and they are essential for us to make a profit? So slave codes were first developed in '62. And what these codes did is they legally made slaves and their children property or chattel for life of their white masters. So from this moment on, if you were a slave, you were never considered anything else but the property of the master. In some colonies, to keep the slaves ignorant and dependent, it was a crime to teach a slave to read or write. If you could read or write, you might be able to do a contract, start a business. You might be able to read things and challenge the master. So some colonies, that became illegal. Many times slaves were, when they came from Africa, they had their own religions. And when they came, many of them were encouraged and taught about the Christian religion. And many did convert. Many did begin to believe in Christianity. But some were told, well, if you change your faith, then we can give you freedom. And that was a manipulation of the slaves. Now, so you had slaves who were owned. Then you had what we called indentured servants, or indentured servitude. These were people who signed a contract that the person, let's say a rich person in Jamestown, would pay for you to come from England, let's say, to work for them. You would have to work for them for 5 or 7 years. You would be promised freedom dues, or you would be promised land or money, or both, at the end of your 5 or 7 year contract. So essentially they're paying for you to come over. You have to work for them for these certain amount of years, and then you get your freedom dues. While you are indentured, you are forbidden to marry because that breaks the contract. And this is a kind of a powerful statistic. In those 4 years at the beginning of Jamestown, was just getting established, and they were bringing indentured servants over, only 1 in 10 outlived their contract. The other important thing in Jamestown was, as it grew, they couldn't always go back to England to get information or the rules or the input, because it would take 3 months to cross the ocean. It would take a month or 2 for the king or for the House of Burgesses to go ahead and discuss the issue, and then 3 months, let's say, to bring the information back. So in Jamestown, they decided we need to create our own representative body to make decisions about what we know, what's going on here, and not wait for the king. And so this is really significant. The first House of Burgesses, it was the first representative form of government in North America that was independent from the king. They were making their own decisions. And so they were deciding how the colony would run and govern itself. This was done without approval of the king. They didn't say, can we do this, King James? They just did it. And they had to do it to bring efficiency in making rules and regulations and defining how the colony would work. So Jamestown gets established, it explodes with indentured servants and slaves, and then as people begin to, as the land around Virginia was taken up with farmers coming, as more people came, they began to move out, they began to move west to the mountains, they began to move south here into today what we know as North Carolina, and they began to move up the coast and go into Maryland and go into Delaware. And so they began to expand. And so by 1660, there were settlements, the Virginia colony was now alone, all along the coast of North America. Bring these notes to class and expect a quiz.